Hello, beautiful ladies. Welcome back to another Wamen Hour. I always introduce it as Women's Hour, even though I've been calling them Wamen Hour for a few weeks now. I wonder if anyone's noticed, but I am trying to slowly ease myself into calling it Wamen Hour. So, welcome to all the Wamen watching and to my two Wamen panelists. Thank you. Welcome back, Amy. Thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Lovely to be back.
And to Mrs. Radlib on your second appearance. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you for having me.
We do appreciate your wisdom and all of your experience, and I think your appearance was very much appreciated last time by the audience as well. So anytime you want to come back, you're certainly welcome. But tonight we are here to discuss. I think it was a book you suggested that we review, although Amy suggested we review it before that even, which is "The Case Against the Sexual Revolution" by Louise Perry. I think we all got plenty to say about that topic and about the book. And before we get into that, though, there are a few news items that I want to cover, just to add a bit of spice and variety and keep the show topical. First thing to address is that this is quite a fresh piece of news. I wonder if you two have even seen this. Women's Hour, Wamen Hour, has some competition. Have you seen this? This is from Ulta Beauty, which is, I think someone said it was the third most profitable, I suppose, the third biggest beauty company in the world, on their YouTube channel, with actually not that many subscribers, almost 100,000 subscribers. Ulta Beauty has a podcast called The Beauty of ... And their latest episode was called The Beauty of Girlhood with Dylan Mulvaney. And as the name might suggest, Dylan Mulvaney was born as a boy, as a man, a male, and is now living as a woman, dressing as a woman. And the co-host of the podcast is also a male person. So this is a podcast about girlhood by a beauty company that makes makeup and skincare, I believe, with two guests talking about girlhood who were born men and have lived as men for most of their childhood and adolescence, at the very least, and a lot of their adulthood, I believe, as well. Have you two seen this story, Amy? You haven't seen this?
No, but I really dread to think about what two grown men dressed as women have to say about girlhood.
Yeah, well, I think. Sorry, Heather, you were shaking your head.
I have not heard of it, and I'm having similar thoughts and questions.
Yeah, well, we won't be talking about it too much, but I have to say, I was surprised that I started listening to most of this. I didn't get through all of it because it's 50 minutes of it. Even at increased speed that YouTube lets you play at, I have not finished watching it. But the start of the show, it sounded actually a lot like Women's Hour, in the sense that I was joking when I said that Women's Hour has competition. Obviously, these two shows are not really comparable at all. But the first story, that they're just kind of chatting, and these two people are sort of sharing their experience of just sort of having chit chat about their childhood memories and the experience of shopping online when you're drunk. And it was kind of light, and it comes across as a very kind of light-hearted feminine conversation, such that we do occasionally indulge in here. And it took almost like a few minutes before they then launched into talking about the sort of coming out, and this Dylan Mulvaney person has a show or a blog called 100 Days of Girlhood. Dylan Mulvaney does not identify themselves as a woman, but as a girl, hence the name Girlhood, which the name of the show or podcast or blog, whatever it is, which is just quite an extraordinary thing. And this person, Dylan Mulvaney, has also, I believe, recently has met Joe Biden. Unless I'm confusing them with another person, I believe this person's just recently met Joe Biden and talked to Joe Biden about this 100 Days of Girlhood show, blog, and is influential enough to meet the president of the United States, which is quite remarkable.
So why girlhood? Why would they talk about girlhood? Why does this person identify as a girl?
There was a part of the podcast where they talked about it, but I can't give you a coherent answer, and I wouldn't like to put my words in the mouth of Dylan Mulvaney. So you'll just have to watch The Beauty of Girlhood on Alta Beauty if you want more answers. I really didn't want to go into this a lot, but I'll just leave it there. Just women news. We're having the women news tonight, and I will recommend. There was a cartoon parody of it done on Freedom Toons, which is a show I've been following for a very long time. It's just a channel on YouTube that produces like 2-minute cartoons. I think like weekly now. And very, very funny guy. They started off being sort of mildly amusing, like libertarian cartoons, but he's only ever got more and more funny. And his one about this show, I thought was very, cuttingly insightful, but also just funny. So go check out Freedom Toons if you haven't seen that already. He's a huge channel, so he really doesn't need me shouting him out. But I really enjoyed that one. And if there's nothing else on that, I'll move on to the bigger news this week. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago? We had the girl boss hegemony. How do you say it? Hegemony. I'm not going to be able to say it at all if I keep repeating it. So we have our Prime Minister has stepped down. Liz Truss, the leader of the Conservative Party, or I should say the former leader of the Conservative Party, has stepped down after only, 44 days, I believe, 45 days in office. And it's just it's all going to shreds. It looks like the Conservatives and the government. It doesn't look good. They don't look like they know what they're doing, to be honest. There's no plan. They announce things only to go back on them, and they elect their leaders only for it to all become too much and for her to have to step down. Quite exciting times. It's rather frightening, if I might say so, to be living in England at the moment with everything that's been going on with inflation and the government, and just not knowing what our money and our property is going to be worth 1 year from now, even. So trying to keep be optimistic, and I think I hope that the next leader is. Let's just say I hope that the next leader is qualified for the job, and that they know what they're doing. At this point, I'm not rooting for the success of the Conservative Party. I'm long past that. I'm just rooting for the country at this point. I just need a leader who knows what they're doing, and who is up to the job and can stomach the position for more than 45 days would be ideal. Wow. Any insight on this, ladies?
I just learned about this today, actually, from one of my older children. So I haven't had a chance to really delve into trying.
It's only yesterday, the news. It's all very fresh.
Yeah,
we're
very fresh.
We're going to be voting on another party leader soon, so we'll see. Penny Mordaunt is another girl boss who may be the next leader of the next girl boss of the Conservative Party. So we'll see if she gets it, or they might even bring Boris back, which is quite an exciting. That would be the only semblance of keeping some kind of continuity, like some kind of facade of order of organization, would be to bring Boris back and then pretend that the last 45 days just didn't happen. It would almost like we could just forget about it and keep continuing on. So we'll see. And finally, I really don't want to discuss this. I only want to mention it because I want it to. I don't want this story to just be forgotten like so many other stories are. I want this to be. I want this name to be on the lips of people for coming years who are trying to talk about the dangers of immigration. I'm of course talking about the killing of 12-year-old Lola in Paris, and to call it a killing is to sum up in one word what is a horrific butchering. Really, what she went through is stomach turning to read, to hear about. I'm not going to go into the details of it here, but it is harrowing. She suffered a lot before she died, obviously, and I think that the true injustice of this is that this story will not be as well known as many other victims of injustice that we've come to, whose names are said over and over again for years after they've gone. To compare her even to Madeleine McCann, who was a child who went missing in England. Not in England. She was the English child that went missing on holiday well over 15 years ago, who I'm sure Amy remembers, maybe not our American friends, but the names of these people that they enter our lives, and then they just get talked about for years and years afterwards. And if Lola is not one of those people, then she certainly deserves to be after everything that happened. So, excuse me. Let's not forget her. If you don't know about the story, please read about it. She was allegedly, we have to say, because there's not been a court hearing yet. There's not been no verdict of guilt, but allegedly this is the fault of a 24-year-old woman who was an Algerian immigrant. She was supposed to be deported. She was not legally supposed to even be there, and she failed to respond. She failed to honor her order to leave the country. Just slipped right back into out of consciousness of the authorities, and just managed to stay in Paris after she was supposed to leave, and facilitated this awful butchery. So
it wasn't the act of a lone killer. It was the act of a group of people.
Yeah,
it's not the result of one person's mental illness.
Although it does, I mean, some crimes are so awful that it feels like to even say that they had a mental illness is redundant, because the crime is proof of mental illness. This certainly is covered by that, but other than that, it does also seem she had a history of being an extremely unhinged
I think
weird
there was
person.
About 4 people involved.
Yeah. Without going into details, yes, I know what you're referring to, and thank you. I think after saying that, I think we should move on to our title topic for tonight, which is The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by Louise Perry. And it's a book that we've all 3 read. Thank you for suggesting that we read it. I think it's a topic that's very worthy of discussion. And there's plenty to say on the subject. I don't know about either of you. Amy, I think you share my my disappointment with the way that it was tackled in this book a little bit. I put some of it down to Louise Perry being a feminist and perhaps writing for feminists, that it seems a little bit, maybe a little bit weak, a little bit like she's, sort of pulling her punches. I would, if I were writing the book, I'd be a lot more, maybe fire and brimstone about it. But Amy, why don't you go first? You are our literary critic of the show.
Well, I wrote this book because I thought it seemed really promising, and I was like you in that, but I think for different reasons. As you said, that you felt like it was wishy-washy, that you wanted some sort of Thomas Sowell level of analysis into this topic. This is such a foundational topic to where things have gone wrong, and in order for it to be rectified, it needs to be dealt with seriously. And I don't think that Louise Perry dealt with this seriously. I think that the book went beyond wishy-washy, in that what it was based on flawed premises, and then it was based on premises that were not just false, but really but based on it. I don't know if it was a misunderstanding that was willful or based on ignorance, but I don't want to go off into an explanation of why I disagreed with it without hearing everyone else's opinions first. But basically, the central argument of this book is that the sexual revolution has primarily benefited a small number of men, who she calls the playboys or the Hugh Hefners of the world or the cads. And thus the sexual revolution has benefited men and not women, and that the solution to this is to tame men. And she uses a number of concepts, including chronological snobbery and disenchantment, incorrectly, not just incorrectly, but in a way that is a complete antithesis of how these ideas were, of what these ideas actually mean. Then she goes on to explain some things which are essentially common sense. And then towards the end of the book, when she talks about marriage and motherhood, I think motherhood, not marriage, motherhood is where she really, there's like a page or two where it really shines. I don't think that the book the sexual revolution has been taken seriously. I don't think that the idea of what men and women are has been taken seriously, or the interactions with each other in the real world or on a spiritual level have been taken seriously. I would say it's beyond feminism that has led to this book being weak. I think that she criticizes it from the paradigm which allowed it to happen.
Okay, yeah, I think that's fair. I'm going to go into that.
The problem went way back to the problem started centuries before the sexual revolution.
Okay.
Sorry.
I definitely want to analyze that, but at first I just want to see what Heather has to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think my initial impression was just I saw an interview with Perry early on, which alerted me to the book, and I thought, well, that sounds interesting, and so I wasn't really sure what to expect. I'm probably one of the few women who has never taken a gender studies class, despite having a bachelor's degree and a master's.
I'm with you.
Really?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the very thing that made you dislike it, Amy, was sort of what I found most interesting, which is that she is arguing against the sexual revolution from the paradigm from which it came. You know what I mean? And I thought, okay, well, this is really interesting. I mean, nothing she said in this book is new. Okay, I've been reading authors who've been saying these very same things for decades. But I think the fact that it was coming from someone who was herself, had herself identified as a feminist is what I found most interesting.
Yeah, I like the epitaph at the start of the book. Is it an epitaph? An epigraph. She acknowledges, what's the word? She dedicates the book to I think women who learned it the hard way. And I think that's what she identifies as. When I was in the middle of reading this book, I made the video a few weeks ago called Regret and Cope, which was partly about feminist women, about women who have had a difficult past. They made decisions that they later come to regret, and how the various ways that women cope with having these heavy regrets that they can't ever get rid of. You can go watch that video if you want to hear my thoughts on that, even though it's not specifically about this book or about feminism or the sexual revolution. But as you say, Amy, just to clarify what I mean by a Thomas Sowell style book, if you've never read Thomas Sowell, I was imagining opening the Cases Against the Sexual Revolution, and chapter 1, page 1 would be just a list of statistics about abortion rates, prostitution, divorce, marriage, all the things that relate to these massive trends that have taken off since the sexual revolution. They can just map these statistics to the invention of the birth control pill and to the sort of cascade of changes to the law that happened in the sort of 50, 60 years afterwards that has led to a dramatically different sort of sexual landscape. It's almost unrecognizable. The dating world of today, which of course does owe something to the invention of the internet and that technology that allows people to talk to each other and meet up and all sorts of things, but is also in a much larger part due to this. I think I disagree with Amy in the sense that I think what was done by the birth control pill of separating pregnancy from sex and therefore sex from marriage is the consequences of that. We may not have even seen how drastic those consequences are going to be. We've only sort of started to see it now, I think. And what has happened is... Sorry, go on.
Interject in that, and that to say that the birth control pill separated sex from reproduction is true biologically. We know that, but there has always been peoples, and there still are peoples today who don't understand the connection between sex and childbirth, and that they think that childbirth is just something that occurs independently from men. But in those cases, marriage and things approaching sexual etiquette, even if they're not what we would consider to be a monogamous marriage, have still existed.
Okay, that is interesting. I mean, that's to take that into a different dimension. I think that is a case of a society or a culture learning something that even the individual people do not understand, where knowledge can be acquired in this way and passed around without the people being consciously aware of what it is that their traditions really mean. And that was certainly to the extent what was going on with, it still is going on with all of us. We, our thinking, like you say, it's so much shaped by the thoughts of our culture that we can't even see the waters that we swim in. But just to put a little point on that, my point about the pill is that I believe, to sum up what happened in the sexual revolution if I had to sum up in a sentence, it would be that before the pill, we thought that all of these traditions, all of these institutions were in place, because sex caused pregnancy. Therefore, we need A, B, and C. We need marriage. Therefore, we need all this and this and this. And once sex no longer caused pregnancy, we thought that we could we hubristically thought that we could just do away with everything that came after that one tiny sort of fact of life that implicated everything else. We in the sense of Chesterton's fence, the principle that in order to get rid of something like a fence, we need to first identify what the purpose of that fence was. Well, we thought that all these institutions, that the purpose was to protect women from getting pregnant, to protect children who were conceived and their mothers. And what we're now finding out is that these things are so interconnected with our psychology, and that you cannot, the pill just put like a little band-aid on it or whatever. It's a mess. Sorry, I'm gonna have a coughing fit. Heather, you take the stage.
Yeah, I wanted to share a memory that I had when I was I think 17, and I was having a difficult time with my periods and went to the OB and was handed birth control pills as the Band-Aid, for dealing with these difficult periods. And the doctor gave me the pill and said, "Here you go have fun. Go have fun." And I remember thinking, I just sort of walked away, sort of trying to wrap my brain around what could that possibly mean? Because, I assume I'm quite a bit older than the two of you. I'm nearly 50. And when I was a teenager, there was still this idea around that sex was significant, at least in some way, right? And it seems to me that as the decades have gone by, that idea has been ground into a powder, such that, as you said, Amy, I mean, my mind was blown as you were talking, that there are people out there who actually don't understand the connection between men and women and having babies. Is that what you're, and childbirth? Is that what you're saying?
Like tribes of what we would call primitive peoples.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not like individuals don't get it. It's that their conception of childbirth is separate from their understanding of sex and relationships between men and women.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we know that they're very intimately connected, of course. But I do think that. So when I was given the birth control pill and told to go have fun, I remember this sort of changed my approach to sex, and I was not sexually active at the time. But being told that by an adult, obviously a feminist, it goes into the first chapter of the book, which is that sex must be taken seriously. So being given birth control pill and being told to have fun is not taking sex seriously at all. And I do think it isn't just the pill, but it's the idea behind it, that we're not only severing sex and conception of children, but also we're severing this idea that there's anything really significant about sex, beyond the physical pleasure of it, and that there's no one talks about bonding, and how significant that is. So,
can I tell you, there's a clip that just blows my mind. Of I don't know if either of you are probably may not be aware of the streamer Vaush, he plays video games and he talks about politics, and he's got a lot of outrageous opinions, including some very dubious ideas about the age of consent that have been long lambasted. But here's one clip where he's saying that if a man objects to his wife or his girlfriend having sex with other men, but does not mind his girlfriend going to being friends with men and playing video games with them, doing other enjoyable activities together, then it's a completely arbitrary distinction to make between your wife enjoying a leisure activity with a man in her life and just having sex. And it's exactly what you described. I think Louise Perry says that the specialness of sex is completely like you said, grounded to dust. And unfortunately, I think I do want to mention that once you make that distinction about sex no longer being special, but just being any other leisure activity that two people can engage in together, it does open the door to all kinds of degeneracy, to use one word for it. Also paedophilia. I don't want to use that word too much because I know the censors will start looking at the stream, but I do want to make it plain that this is a really dangerous idea. Go on.
Can I bring up? So, Poe, you brought up the two issues, but both of you brought up issues that are addressed in the introduction. The first is you brought up Chesterton's Gate, which I believe is actually mentioned, or Chesterton's Fence, one of the two. And then there's the idea that there's any meaning, there's any specialness to sex. These are both addressed in the introduction, where she talks about sexual disenchantment, using Max Weber's description of disenchantment of the natural world that resulted from enlightenment as the ascendance of rationality stripped away from the sense of magic that this enchanted garden has once held for pre-modern people. In much the same way, sex has been disenchanted in the post-1960s West, leaving us with a society that ostensibly believes that sex means nothing. So she uses that idea, and then later on she uses the idea, which she has taken from C.S. Lewis's the Surprise by Joy, which is of chronological snobbery, which is linked to Chesterton's Gate Fence, in which she says, she says that she describes herself as post-liberal and that she's against the idea of moral progress as attached to technological progress. So she says, C.S. Lewis coined the phrase chronological snobbery to describe the uncritical acceptance of the intellectual climate of our own age and the assumption that whatever has gone out of date on that, and whatever has gone out of date is on that count discredited. And so these two concepts I'd just like to address because they're really fundamental to why I disagree, why I think that this book failed. It's that I'll start with chronological snobbery, but the two are connected because C.S. Lewis was C.S. Lewis got it's not his term. It's from his friend Owen Barfield, who helped Lewis. If it wasn't for Owen Barfield, C.S. Lewis may never have converted to Christianity. So C.S. Lewis was a rationalist. He was like a jaded atheist, materialist, and he was extremely committed to it. And his great love in life was mythology, particularly Norse mythology and European mythology and classical mythology in general. And in the 1920s, Lewis and Barfield and Tolkien had what they jokingly referred to as the Great War, which was a war of ideas, in which Lewis, on the one hand, believed that the source of truth of knowing reality is empiricism, and that the chronological snobbery that Perry mentioned is linked to this. So Tolkien and Barfield tried to persuade him that this was not the case. The idea that the Great War had two components, that the past didn't people of the past did not have things that did not understand the truth in the way that we do, and that our current understanding of truth is incorrect. And so there's more to this sort of chronological snobbery than is mentioned in this passage by Perry, and it's connected to this idea of disenchantment, which originated with Weber, but Barfield went on to really expand a few years later. And that Barfield, this is a question of epistemology. Barfield was mainly concerned with epistemology and meaningless in relation to empirical knowledge. And he pointed out that the more we're able to understand the material world, as in scientific discovery, the more that we're able to manipulate the material world, the less we're able to see any meaning in it. And that since the scientific revolution, but for him the progress lasted. The process started long before this. It was that there had been a progress in alienation, and that this took hold first of all through the alienation of man from the world around him, and then through which was done through the objectivity of the scientific method, and the alienation of man from his body was the second part of that, because man is part of nature. So nature is alienated, man is part of nature, and so man sort of becomes alienated from himself. And then the third and final part of this was through the mind. The brain is part of the human body, which is alienated because that's part of nature, which is alienated. And so through this, and this happened through the psychological sciences, and that the price that we've paid for this is a complete loss of meaning in nature in general and in ourselves. And that collectively, as individuals, our way of knowing, our mode of consciousness has changed over time. The way we see the world has actively changed. He saw evidence of this in the history of the use of the word pneuma, which we would translate today as either spirit or breath or wind, depending on the context, because we separate the three words into a literal meaning and a metaphorical meaning. And that we can tell through the use of this word in the past that the ancients didn't do this because there was no distinction between the three to them. They existed as a unity. And so the word pneuma meant something like spirit, breath, wind. And that man lived in a state which he refers to as original participation, in which the border between the physical world and the metaphysical world were not distinct, and that this is kind of around the same time as Evola and Gwinon were writing, and it's part of that same intellectual revival that was happening at the time, with regards to understanding the world of tradition as something that is metaphysical and can be discerned through mythology and anthropology. And our ancestors once had, through original participation, that our ancestors once had direct access to this way of knowing truth through experience with the spiritual world that we've completely lost. And that this started prior to the scientific revolution, but the scientific revolution was like added a formulation to this sort of change of consciousness and this shutting off from the like eternal metaphysical realm. And that what is meant by disenchantment is not metaphors like inferences that help to console us or to help us to understand the material world around us. It's not like an enchanted garden. They didn't see it in that way, but it's how the world simply was. The sort of membrane between the metaphysical world and the material world was thinner. And so with a phrase like chronological snobbery, Lewis and Barfield and Tolkien, they didn't mean people in the past had some interesting things to say or some information that is of utility to us that we should keep a hold of. What they meant is that these people had they had access to this metaphysical reality, to this other plane of existence where truth, where capital T tradition comes from. And that what Louise Perry has done is to take these concepts and which are completely antithetical to the ideas of utility and seeing humans as animals and as primarily sort of biological beings, as psychological beings, and to strip these two terms of the core of what they mean, and use these terms simply to mean what could materially, psychologically, emotionally benefit women. I think that that's what I meant when I said she's trapped in the mode of existence which caused this in the first place, is that complete change from an experiential understanding of metaphysical truths to something that is simply used as a utilitarian argument for the benefit of improving the lot of a specific group of people over others.
Well, to be honest, I think that improving
that was a long thing, but that is the core base, is that that's what she does throughout the next several chapters, is to go through these things and to then say, these things to say these things are better, should be used to benefit women. These things are tools to be used to benefit women, and in a way, what she's doing is wallpapering over cracks in the walls that threaten the entire structural integrity of the house.
I think I get what you mean. When I said that I wanted the book to be a Thomas Sowell book, it seems like you went completely the other way, where I don't know if you're expecting too much, to be honest, but it sounds like you wanted to read
No, I'm basing it on the concept she uses.
She was reaching for something that she shouldn't have tried to include if she couldn't do it justice.
That she didn't even, I'm no genius, but I knew that, because it took a basic amount of research to know that. It didn't take, I'm not that special. Okay. She's using these as the foundation of her book. And she hasn't researched them and uses them wrong.
I think it's not right to use concepts incorrectly, of course. I don't know if she used it as the basis of her book, to be honest. And although I don't excuse mistakes, I think it's not enough on its own to condemn the entire book, in my opinion. I
Well,
think
that would be
that's a very interesting points you brought up.
why it went wrong.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. I was talking over you.
I mean, that is the starting point of I think why it went wrong, is that it doesn't attempt to deal with the issues at hand. It you know, it just seems to want to take elements of the past that were beneficial for women and to add them into a 1970s feminist discourse.
Well, I think we can agree that that women, materially and observably, and also children and also men have suffered in these ways that she describes. Yeah. So from this utilitarian point of view, even to just look at it from purely material lens, there's a point to be made. That's why I wanted the book to start off with these statistics, because everyone understands that these outcomes are bad. It just requires to put them in a list and to show that this started happening, with the sexual revolution. I think
the problem is this goes consider this idea. This idea that because the sexual revolution has benefited some men and therefore benefits men in general while not benefiting women, and that women are almost entirely suffer from the results of the sexual revolution is not correct, because everyone suffers, and everyone suffers not just because of the reasons she gives in relation to the sex industry and in relation to I guess building on from the sex industry, how that influences sexual relations between men and women in the bedroom, is one aspect of a larger problem that is to do with our understanding of men and women. And then her solution to this is to simply tame men. Now, what she does is she says, because she used to work in a rape crisis center, and that she takes the fact that she's worked in this rape crisis center to say, she sees these traumas, which are undeniably traumas, but they're acute traumas and they're tangible and you can see them. And that is an aspect of the sexual revolution that has been facilitated by the sexual revolution, but have always existed. And I'm saying that the problem with the sexual revolution is not that it allows these traumas to happen, and that there's lots of traumas. There's traumas that occur to men, and just because they're not acute and tangible in the way that a rape is, or in the way that a sexually motivated murder is, it does not lessen them. And that women does not lessen those traumas that men experience, and it doesn't lessen the traumas that most women who are not sexually assaulted, who do not have to participate in pornography or prostitution, who are not murdered by men for sexually motivated reasons. It does not. Most women do not experience that, but they still are damaged by the sexual revolution. And it's not necessarily because of this aspect of it. It's because it's really been the final nail in the coffin of an idea of what a man is supposed to be and what a woman is supposed to be, and which is something that has been passed down from tradition and has been attacked since the Enlightenment. When you think about what was the kind of publications that were going on in the Enlightenment, there was a genre of quasi-satirical pornography which linked rationality to the sexual liberation of women as a sort of semi-joke, but was used as propaganda. These things are not new.
Yeah, I appreciate your that insight. I'm conscious of time now. Heather, did you want to give some of your thoughts on the book or anything that Amy said?
Well, I guess I came into the reading of this book without really very many expectations, and so I didn't experience a great deal of disappointment. I certainly do not think that she covered all the bases in terms of, I mean, this is a huge topic, you know, and it how we conduct ourselves sexually affects every single aspect of our life. And I think that that's something that has been fully denied across the board. It does affect men, it does affect women, it affects children. It isn't just something that we talk about behind closed doors or that we do behind closed doors. It's seeping into every aspect of our lives. I can't go outside with my own children without seeing, immodestly dressed women or just sexuality just completely out there, and there's just no protection for anyone anymore. So going into the reading of this book, I just didn't have a lot of expectation. And so by the end, I just remember thinking, I actually cried because I thought, okay, here we have a young woman who has done her the best she can with what she's got and her lived experience. And she's argued herself to marriage and fidelity and monogamy and protecting children. And I kind of felt like it was a small miracle, to be quite honest, because I think at this point, people in their 20s, teenagers, people in their 30s, even, the sexual revolution that's just how it is, or it seems like that's how it always has been. There's no remembrance of traditional courtship or the very idea that elders in your life or your community would be participating and protecting you and protecting the men from, that there would be any structure to how people come together sexually is just this foreign idea. So I think she had a difficult task in front of her. And I do think that there's more to be said on the topic. But I really appreciated the effort that she did make. And I found her final chapter, that marriage is good, to be kind of tender in some parts, and just really, when she implores at the end of this chapter, when she says, get married and do your best to stay married. I mean, this is a concept that people cannot grasp anymore. The idea that you would stay in a marriage that isn't utter bliss, or that your partner isn't providing every single aspect of fulfillment for you, is just unheard of these days. So I'm just impressed that she could land in that place, given the chaos that the current situation is right now.
Oh, her conclusion is to become married because that tames men. And I think that the problem, she uses this sort of cad versus dad dichotomy. A cad is in, a sort of what she describes as a playboy, and the dad is a sort of a man who has had those tendencies, who's transformed away from those tendencies. And I would say that is not satisfactory, in that it's certainly not a satisfactory reason to get married. And I think that the reason for that is because I would say, instead of this sort of dad versus dad dichotomy, really the role of the dad is quite diminutive in comparison to the role of a father, right? So I would prefer to see it as to see the dad less in this diminutive role and as more as the rock, as like the center around which all else revolves. And I would like to just bring up a TV show from the early 2000s called 8 Simple Rules. which was one of those sort of sitcoms where initially it started off with the dad being a bit silly and not able to deal with the parenting of his 2 teenage daughters. But the actor that played the dad, John Ritter, died in 2003 when they were filming the beginning of the 2nd season. But they continued the show without him, and there was quite a serious several episodes where they were sort of getting over this, mourning the death of the father in their family. And the father went from a sort of buffoon to someone who had offered he was the moral center of the family. There was a point in which the eldest daughter bought a new dress to go to a school dance. And it was quite a provocative dress. And she comes down the stairs about to go out, and no one stops her. And she bursts into tears because Dad would never have let her gone out like that. And there's another section in which the son, Rory, steals a car, his mum's car, and drives it and ends up crashing it. And the mum says, "We both know you never would have done anything like this if your dad was around." And I think that this really drives home the fact that men should not be put into diminutive positions, and that is one of the key results and causes of the sexual revolution, is to put men into these like diminutive positions. And I think that, if that was 2003, in which these sort of basic truths about the role of a father as a moral director of a family, which were acknowledged, and that can only come through strength.
I think that is a good insight into fatherhood, and you're right. I think Cad and Dad just rhyme, and she liked that.
Yeah. But it's supposed to be a serious
You're
book.
correct. I think I do want to point out that she, when analysing the winners and losers from the sexual revolution, just to come back to something you said earlier about Cads, she describes this setup by which women become the losers in the situation. These women who are taken advantage of by these few men to whom all of the sexual gratification of modern life are. They're the beneficiaries, these cads, these Hugh Hefners. And there is one small part near the start of the book where I think she does point out that in the final analysis, Hugh Hefner did not have a very happy life, even though he had beautiful women beyond the average man's wildest dreams in a huge quantity. Really, when it's looked at how good a life is that really. So I think she does acknowledge that this is bad for everyone, not just the women who are taken advantage of, not just the men who are left sexless by this system that rewards only the top men, but just everyone, and children, and pretty much anyone you can conceive of. Crime as well. I think she brings up at one point it being a factor. Maybe I'm thinking of something else actually. I'm not sure about that. But something else I wanted to bring up, that I wanted to get both of your opinion on. I think she quite well summarized this very odd paradox of the times that we live in, by which sex is, like you say, disenchanted, and simultaneously it's everywhere. All advertising in our culture, in our clothes, everything that we do, it's like, I believe in America they say that it's even more sort of shoved in your face, like the advertising in particular. But you can't watch films or TV, anything made in the last few decades, without having premarital sex, and just sex in general, like talking about sex, words that refer to sex. It's really thinking back to how young I was when I first heard of terms, sexual acts that even today I find like mildly disgusting, but I was hearing about them when I was like 11 years old, and hearing them described, people talking about watching pornography in particular, just like a massive headline of this entire thing. I think she did a good job of condemning just the use of pornography and calling out the people who say, oh, just men being men, like men need to do this. And she actually takes quite a, for a modern feminist, she takes quite a hard line against this and says there is no ethical consumption of pornography. It's not good for the consumer. It's definitely not good for the people who produce it. And it really evoked that sadness of how disenchanted we are with sex. Just the sense that to hesitantly hold the hand of a teenage romance, it's somehow sullied by the fact that these lovesick teenagers have both consumed fairly hardcore pornography at this point. The extent to which innocence now for the youth of today and for everyone is just completely lost, to some extent. Once lost, it can never be found again. And that we, it's like the sex that people are having. You'd think that the one thing the sexual revolution would do would be to make women and men enjoy sex more, but people are not enjoying sex. They're not having sex, even in a lot of cases. People under 30, the statistics are quite horrific. And if you read these articles women write about their sex lives, it's all, oh, we watch pornography together, we use sex toys, all of this, like, really gross stuff that people have to do just to enjoy sex with each other now. It's really just quite depressing. I think she did a good job of kind of summing that up. I don't know, I wonder what you two think about that. Should we come back to Amy again?
Yeah, I think that she, speaking about the dangers of porn, she listed the dangers of porn. Like I said, a lot of this, I thought she came at this from the wrong angle. I don't think that. I think that there are. So, I think that I don't know. I don't really know what to do with those middle chapters, if I'm honest. I think that she simply listed basic information. The book was split into these three sections, in which she set up somewhere to go, then listed basic information, and then there was the last section which had issues with it, but which, like Mrs. Radlib said, had aspects of it that were tender. It was just common sense. It was stuff that a lot of people have been saying.
It isn't so common anymore. And I think that's why I felt so tender about it at the end. I thought, oh gosh, this is going to seem like an amazing insight to some people, when it's really something that we all used to know inherently. I do think it's very tragic, the exposure to pornography. I kind of, my teenagehood, certainly there was pornography out there and available, but you actually had to go to a store and buy a physical copy. You risk exposing yourself to what, showing people in your community what you were about by going out. And these days you can just access it. Well, I don't know, because I don't look at pornography, but it was just insane. I mean, I guess in this regard, I was learning something and reading it, because I just had no idea how horrible and disgusting.
It really is.
It would be an interesting angle to come at it from, is that it's assumed that because there is access to porn, people are having less. Because people watch porn, people aren't having sex because they're watching porn. Whereas I think that it that are people who analyze it from this angle is that maybe people are watching porn because they don't want to have sex.
Go on.
Is it because of the way that gender roles, sexuality roles in gender and sexuality, the role that a woman is supposed to strive towards and fulfill, and the role that the man is supposed to strive towards and fulfill, have been so decimated by our society that men are no longer feeling desire for women, and that women are no longer feeling desire for men.
I have to say I'm not sure about that, but
I mean, it's so rarely considered, especially not by women, and definitely not by feminists.
I mean, obviously it's possible. I don't know how you would analyze that question.
Well, I think that when she talks, there's the one where she talks about what is it? Violence is not love, and she speaks about extremely sort of crude acts of physical violence, which she believes have been coming from pornography. That people do this because they see it in porn. She specifically uses choking as an example. And that she says that this is bad. This is a bad thing, which I believe this is. I'm not arguing against this. I believe this is a bad thing. She believes it is a bad thing. But a potential angle coming at that from, which could provide more insight into what is going on, is that violence from a man towards a woman during sex, during the sexual act, is essentially the only sphere in which a man is able to show any amount of dominance in our society.
I was thinking the exact same thing when I read that part, actually, Amy. So I'm really glad you brought that up, and that you had that thought as well. That women are so desperate to see a man being assertive and aggressive, which you'd think that in perhaps not more normal circumstances you'd be seeing your man threatening other men, or being at least a little bit bravado, some machismo. Now that the only time you can see your man being sincerely aggressive is when he gets on Xbox chat, or or just being aggressive in the bedroom.
I mean, having any level of authority and agency in the world at all. The only place a man is allowed to win is in a computer game. So no wonder men play computer games, to the detriment of everything else going on in their life, to the detriment of a career, to the detriment of a family, to the detriment of having a financial independence or any sense of meaning in his life at all. If the only place a man can express domination over not even necessarily like authority over a woman is pornography, then no wonder men will be watching pornography.
I think my husband shared. I'm not on Twitter, so I don't see things, but sometimes he'll share something with me, and he shared this really interesting tweet. Says, "I think the men I date are too feminist?" ?
I saw that. Yeah.
Did you see this
one? I saw it. Yeah. Okay. It's not sexy at all for a man to be a feminist.
Right. She says he's super feminist, all about equality. He's quite political, which is great and fine. I'm absolutely all for being treated equal, and all that goes without saying. However, this is where I was it really got me interested. I'm not sure if this is the reason I'm feeling absolutely no spice to this relationship. It all feels so completely neutral. Not necessarily him, but our relationship. Anyway, she goes on in which she doesn't even have the language to express what it is that she's wanting, which is that she's wanting him to be a man. She's wanting him to step up and initiate. And it's so interesting because we addressed this in our discussion, the Mrs. Radlib stream on Sex and Society, via the therapist Esther Perel, where she talks about how egalitarianism absolutely kills erotic desire. And so I absolutely agree with you, Amy, when you say that it seems that the only area in which a man can express this not domination. I know that's not quite what you were getting at, but assertiveness,
Authority
and assertiveness and leadership is to go off in this very dysfunctional, very unhealthy way, both for the man and the woman.
And it's the only way a woman can experience it.
Right. And so we get things like 50 Shades, and this sort of dysfunctional expression of what we deep down really want and need in the relationship. We want a man who can lead, and this is, again, I just think it's probably the most important topic of the age, is that men have been told that their leadership is inherently abusive and they're not allowed to protect women, and the only thing they're really allowed to do is use them. And no one's winning. Everybody's being damaged by it. And, she did focus a lot on the physical differences between men and women. But again, in my Sex and Society talk, I said, look, there's obvious differences, but there's a lot of similarity. We have this biological response of bonding. This bonding hormone is released in both men and women during the sex act, and it's being denied, and it's extremely damaging to everyone involved.
I think that when the ideas that I was trying to express at the beginning about tradition were very difficult to articulate, but when we think about traditional traditional roles of men and women, masculinity is a good thing and femininity is a good thing, and that these two things have been systematically destroyed, and that this happened before the sexual revolution. This was part of the same project as the sexual revolution, and it has only been sped up since the sexual revolution. And I think because very little effort has been made by Perry to understand the nature of masculinity and the nature of femininity and the necessity of both of these things in having a healthy orientation within society and within us as individuals, is what has led to the failure of this book. Her idea of the dad, of what she wants a man to be in marriage, is completely lacking in anything that is going to provide authority, that is going to provide leadership, that is going to provide desire. It's going to completely destroy, in much the same way the sexual revolution has. And in a way, those things were already destroyed prior to the sexual revolution.
Yeah, that is a good point. I don't know if there's enough in her book to be able to conclusively infer that, but you may well be right on that. I do want to bring up a point. Maybe it's related to this. I don't know, but something I noticed in the book, and I think I started noticing around the time she talked about this choking thing. She talked about prostitution. She talked about women who do porn. And in every single case, I think she bent over backwards trying to remove women's agency and their responsibility for these things, as women collectively or individually, where she didn't. It seemed like she was trying to, at all costs, try to remove the accountability of the women who participate in these things. And I know she's absolutely correct that the women who participate in porn and prostitution, often they are, human trafficked. They're in poverty. I'm not talking about those women who may well be doing what they have to survive. But even among the more sort of affluent women who she calls like sex tourists, I think, these women who the OnlyFans of today, the OnlyFans creators,
sex work tourists.
Thank you. She describes them as being tricked by this system, and not. She never ever describes them as being beneficiaries of this system. or as being themselves, manipulative of the men who are paying them, or of the system, or anything. And I think she's right not to call them beneficiaries, in the sense that in the final analysis, these women absolutely do not win. Prostituting yourself and selling yourself online, selling images of yourself, any of these things, it's never worth the money you get from it. Even if you never actually put yourself in danger or anything, it's I think everyone on the stream would agree with me. It's just not worth it. These women are not winning; they're kidding themselves. But I think that doesn't remove their accountability and their responsibility for what they are. Adult women doing things to their body, and in the feminist sense, they are doing what they know what they're doing. And I think it's wrong to remove accountability from that, even if she's being subtle about it. Maybe I'm just reading that into the book, but I think that's we can't just put the blame on men and say, oh, the only people winning are these few men at the top who are having all the sex with exotic, a variety of women, and say that therefore it's their fault and they need to fix it. It's everyone's fault. We've all got to fix it if it is to be fixed. People who do bad things need to take responsibility for that. The consequences are, in some part, their own to deal with. So I wondered what, Heather, what did you think about that?
Well, I mean, the chapter on consent, I guess, is what comes to mind. And, I found, just trying to go to it here in the book to find my underlines. One thing that she said here stood out to me, if I can find it. Sorry, looking. I do find the idea of consent problematic because of the grooming that starts from a very young age with women. Here, where she says, people, particularly young women, will sometimes claim the ability to consent to some of the worst harms you can imagine. And she then goes on to talk about grooming and this being a loss of psychological independence. I want to be careful not to overshare, but having been raised in a home that was full throttle, hippies and sexual revolution going on, I found that it was very difficult to grasp on to anything, to try to really understand the boundary of consent and all this stuff, because it feels like it just sort of sweeps you up. And when you get swept up at such a young age and you don't really have an opportunity or, to step back and really think about what you're doing and the consequences of it, it can be hard to really understand what you're consenting to. And so I was sympathetic. I mean, I'm not saying that I disagree. I do agree that each individual certainly is accountable to take responsibility for their choices. But I do think that it can be hard to discern what exactly you're consenting to. I think, again, this is where there's been a tremendous failure on the part of men to step up and take more of a leadership role and a protective role of their daughters. And so I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, but that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, thank you for that. What you said does remind me to say that I don't know everyone else, but I'd like to take a moment to personally take responsibility for things that I personally have done in the past. People I've wronged. Without going into detail, I'm not completely blameless, and I think it is important to when trying to encourage people to make themselves accountable and take responsibility, is not to put ourselves on a pedestal to preach at other people and say that that we've done no wrong and that it's everyone else who needs to pay. I think yeah, that we're all sinners, and I just want to make sure that no one thinks that I take myself out of that. Amy, did you have anything?
I'm with this topic, with this issue of consent. I am with Mrs. Radlib, and that this is the water that we swim in. We are saturated with it. It is the only option. Most women simply do not know that there are other options to this, that there are other options to, not just with regards to sexual consent, but simply, people aren't even raised with the option that you could, like, you're not raised with the option. You're not raised with the option to live in a certain way, because it is, any aspect of that has been systematically taken out of our culture. If you don't access that somehow, then how are you supposed to know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I found that I found my way there truly by the grace of God, because as young as 14 years old, I was being asked out by 18-year-old seniors in high school, and was being encouraged by my mother. Why don't you want to go out with him? And I'm thinking, well, he's like a grown man, and I'm a kid, like I'm having to explain to her why I'm uncomfortable. Right. And of course, where was my father? Right. My father was not in the home. He was not protecting me. He was gone. His role had been completely dismissed and diminished, and he was long gone. And so, I had to sort of test the waters in ways that traumatized me and in some aspects. And thankfully, I ended up converting at a younger age, at age 23. But even before I converted to Christianity, I just remember getting to this place where I was like, okay, clearly my picker is broken here, okay? In terms of my ability to make good choices for myself, clearly I just need to just stop altogether. And I just stopped, and just really took a step back, and was able to kind of catch my breath, and then be able to evaluate. I had my head enough above water that I could sort of evaluate, what I wanted, and to really give myself permission to have boundaries. I mean, I remember one time a man asking me if I would go on a hike with him, and I said no. And he was an older guy, kind of a hippie, and he was just like, well, why not? And I said, well, because I'm not going for a walk in the woods alone with a man. and it just sort of like, he could not understand why I would, but this language, this whole idea that it's even okay to say no, that it's okay to have boundaries. And the reason that it doesn't make sense to have boundaries is because sex is just like everything else. So again, this is why I think she started with the premise that sex is to be taken seriously, that there's something significant actually happening here. And I don't think that she fully touched on why it's significant. And I at least tried to in our talk on sex and society, which is to say that when we have sex, our bodies are bonding. We're creating a bond, and every time we dismiss that, we're breaking a part of ourselves,
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, and just to come back to you say about the grace of God, I feel exactly the same way. Not only more recently than that came to Christianity, back to Christianity, but for me it was just meeting my husband, and just falling in love with him at the age of 18, and that just by complete coincidence, just not out of any sense of virtue or morality, any good sense on my part, just because I was lucky enough to fall in love with a good man who knew how to teach me a better way, and to I feel so grateful that I was just sort of picked out of singlehood that early, and that I've never looked back. I was so grateful to have got out of that at the age of 18 and not like 28. It's so that's one of my best decisions I've ever made was getting married, I think, to the man I'm married to. We are well over our 1 hour budget for Wamen hour, but I do want to give Amy, first of all, an opportunity to have any closing words, and then we'll come to Heather if you want to think about anything you want to say before we close. I would like to say that actually Louise Perry personally liked the tweet where I said we were going to be talking about her book, so there's a possibility she's been watching this the whole time. If you're watching this, Louise, I'm sorry, but we have to be honest. We're reviewing this book honestly. So, Amy, any closing thoughts?
I think if I was her, I'd be sick of it already. But that's just me. That's just mine. I'd be like, oh, right, next thing.
Possibly, it's possible.
Because I imagine it must have taken years to write the book, and she's probably writing about that prior. So, and then what did she say? She did 70 interviews in the space of a few months.
Yeah.
How exhausting.
Yeah. If I was her, I'd just be sick of it. I wouldn't want to look at it again.
Probably.
I think the reason that I come from this from a different angle is because my experience of what brought me here was completely different, and so. In the book, we've mentioned a few times that she is a feminist, and that throughout the book she defends contraception, the birth control pill, abortion, and divorce, and women who have young children finding themselves through careers, stuff like that. Very feminist. And ideas about the things that are necessary for women to keep them safe. And they're almost, in a way, I think, they're almost like a cloak of protection, and that we use these things in as a society in order to not have to deal with the root cause of the issue, which is the complete destruction of masculinity and the complete destruction of femininity. And the way I came into this sort of area of interest was because in 2019 my father was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer, which lung cancer is an extremely difficult cancer to treat. But it was the first time in my life that I never experienced any sort of anxiety. And I still don't, because I just knew that he would survive. And he survived. And at the beginning of 2019, he was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. It seemed almost certain that he would die. And then at the end of 2019, he was cured of stage 3 lung cancer. And the prognosis for the next 5 years was that he would have a 50-50 chance of surviving those 5 years. And in the beginning of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic started, which had specifically attacked the lungs. So he had a 50-50 chance of surviving the next 5 years without that, let alone with that. And I still believed that it would be okay, and that there would never be I still never felt any anxiety, and I still don't feel any anxiety. And I find that faith into having that level of that experience of faith was something that is completely alien to me. It is something that had never happened in any aspect of my life, no matter how trivial it was. And I think that what me and my dad have never had a bad relationship, but my dad has always been the central figure of authority in our household, no matter what has been the case. And he is not perfect, and like most people of his age, went with a lot of boomer truth ideas. And to me, that was disjointed, and there was a lot of anger in that if you say you believe in these things, why don't you act accordingly? Why do you maintain, why does the final say always come down to you? And I think that when he was diagnosed, all of that changed, because no matter how close he was to death, he was still always the central force of our family and of all of our lives. And I think that to be able to have that level of faith in directed a man, whether that be a father or a husband, is something that is extremely liberating. I'm not very good at explaining that thing, but I want to be able. That completely reoriented my life. That completely reoriented my outlook onto what was important, and to no longer feel the sense of authority as a threat.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it, I think. And thank you for that. Heather, any last words?
Wow. Well, I found that very moving, Amy, and I think you're right that when the order of things is where it's supposed to be, there is a peace and a relaxation that comes from that we can rest in it, right? And I don't see a lot of resting in our culture right now. I see a lot of unhappiness and a lot of confusion, and no one knows what they're doing anymore, and it's very sad. And I don't know what it's going to take to restore men to their rightful place as authorities in their home. I don't know what it's going to take, but I appreciated Perry's effort, however minute, to try and understand how we got to where we are now, and some of her suggestions out of it. And I think there's more to be said and more to discuss. So I'll end with that.
Heather, are you coming on your husband's Mr. Radlib? Is he hosting you on his podcast coming up on his channel?
You mean a Mrs. Radlib stream?
Yeah.
Yeah. So next month we'll be talking about hospitality as we go into the holidays, and then after that, I actually would like to address the topic of male authority.
Great. Well, I really look forward to seeing that. All of your shows with your husband are brilliant. I always catch those. They're so good.
Thank you so much.
I love to see it. And on the subject of live streams, last week I saw just reminded because Lambda's in the chat today. Last week he was actually streaming against us, which is a little bit cheeky, but I understand why he did, because he had Carl Benjamin on his channel this time last week. And I understand he's probably quite busy, and he had to take whatever time slot he could get. But that stream with Carl Benjamin was very, very good. I just dropped in to cheekily say that naughty you for streaming against Women's Hour, but I ended up staying, and I'm so glad I did, because I listened to it for 2 hours after that point. Really very interesting stream, completely different to what we're talking about here. But I've never heard Mr. Sargon, Carl, be so open and frank about basically talking about atheism and the disenchantment again in modernity, what's being lost, the tradition of religion in this country. Just very interesting to hear. My personal opinion, anyway. So thanks. If you see Lambda in the chat, click on his name, and it'll take you right to his channel. Maybe not actually. Is it Lambda? Tell us, is it Lambda or is it Lambda Bible Studies where you were talking to? I think it was Lambda Bible Studies. They just kept talking and talking. It was brilliant. I loved it. While Proper Horror Show is also in the chat, I should also be plugging my own appearance on Proper Horror Show's channel on the 3rd of November. We're doing the Proper Horror Show does a horror movie live stream every week, and I'm going to be talking about. I think it's going to be It Follows, the horror movie, one of my favorite horror films. So there we go. Lambda says it's Lambda Bible Studies. Go check out that stream, and go to subscribe to Proper Horror Show if you want to see me talking about It Follows. Next week on Women's Hour we have Aiden Paladin, as was requested by our super chat. I forgot to do the whole super chat spiel at the start of the stream, which is fine. We did get one subject. It was a joke, but since we didn't get any other super chats, this is going to be the next suggestion to tackle for topics. How many cats is too many for one family / person?
Oh,
I think the limit of pets should be the number of people plus one. Well, that's a great... I've never heard that rule before. I'll ask the ladies to talk about that next time. And I'll ask Aiden Paladin as well. She strikes me as a cat person. I don't know why. Not in a bad way. I just mean I think she likes cats more than dogs. We also had another super chat from TRT is King, asking about Aiden Paladin. So I hope that answers that question. And Aiden Paladin also had another video out this week about famous people dying, which is kind of a random one, but I enjoyed that. Just analysing the psychology of ways we react to people dying. We also have another super chat suggestion for a topic, which is to review the movie A Bothersome Man, or The Bothersome Man. I haven't seen it yet, but I will watch it and I will review it, even if none of my other panelists do. But we'll see how many people we can get to discuss it. Sorry, what was that, Amy?
Is it new?
It's a few years old, the film. It's some Scandinavian country's production. We'll talk about it more in the chat. So, thank you very much, Amy. Thank you very much, Heather. And I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye.